Professor David Miller of Oxford University is the author of a book entitled Is Self-Determination a Dangerous Illusion? And self-determination, again, sounds like an obvious thing, but it can be a slippery idea. It can be self-determining like North Korea.
It's no good saying to the Catalan separatists or the Quebec nationalists, look, you have democracy. For many purposes, you need to be a larger unit to have the kind of economic and political clout that can enable you to pursue an independent policy. So there is a dilemma there, a dilemma of scale as to what is the optimum size and scale for effective self-determination.
You're listening to Good Morning Scotland on Sunday. Our guest for the long interview this week is Professor David Miller, the author of Is Self-Determination a Dangerous Illusion? And one of the main reasons for talking about self-determination, I suppose, is that quite a lot of countries over the last decades have seen their own movements for secession, for breaking up.
Yes, I think secession from an existing state is one possible avenue of self-determination. But as you say, there are other avenues too. And I think that secession really ought to be considered as a last resort if what you're seceding from is a reasonably well-functioning democracy. Self-secession is never really a clean break. It's not a case of one group of people, all of whom are united in wanting to secede, taking their territory with them. It's always messier than that. It always involves taking with you minority groups who would much rather have remained in the bigger unit. So the question is always going to be, taking people as a whole and considering their different kinds of demands for self-determination, is it better to have some kind of devolved or federal system in which different subunits get political rights, or is it better to split? And I suppose my instinct is to say that secession should be the last resort.
You point out that there are few examples of uncontested secession.
So I'd never want to oppose an uncontested secession. I think some political philosophers who address this argue that the only real reason that can justify secession is to demonstrate that the group who wants to leave have been entreated unjustly in some quite fundamental way. For example, by being denied their basic human rights or having their territory seized or something of that kind. So the mere wish, the mere willingness to want to become a new country shouldn't count unless you can also demonstrate that there is a justice cause as well.
So you have to show that you're oppressed and perhaps that you would not oppress others were you to become a self-sustained state.
That's the view, and that of course would mean that nearly all of the contemporary claims made by independence movements would not succeed on that criterion. I think the appeal of independence is clear. The complicating factor is really, I think, the one we've talked about already, that nations are not homogenous. They contain within them national minorities, and indeed they may themselves form part of larger wholes in the way, for example, that Scotland forms part of Britain or Catalonia forms part of Spain.
So does that mean that, just to take the Scottish example, if Scotland wanted to leave the United Kingdom, the rest of the United Kingdom should have a say in that?
Well, that's a very...
Because that's part of the UK's self-determination.
I do think that Britain as a whole has a legitimate interest in what goes on in Scotland. I mean, this is part of British territory historically, and it's been the site of a collective self-determination over several centuries. So I think you've got here two rival self-determination claims, and the question we must ask is, what kind of resolution can do most justice to two quite important, valid claims in their own right.